Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show. Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free thanks to the support of our community. Our VIP supporters include Jason Detbarn of Adigy.com, Watchman Monitoring, and Adam Angst of Tidbits Content Network. Thanks very much for supporting the show. We'd like to welcome Michael Thomsen, director of Origin84 on Command Control Power. It's been a while. I'm trying to remember when the last time was that we spoke. I mean, we've seen you at ACES a few times. We've had you on the show a bunch. We've spoken offline, but on the show, it's been a little while. So what's new in your neck of the woods?
A bit like everybody else. So we've sort of seen out the most of the pandemic, and it's been interesting to be in a country which is so isolated from everywhere else, and a lot of people here are expats. So we've had particularly with our staff, some people from overseas who have not yet managed to get back and see their family.
Wow.
But at the same time, it's been like you've probably experienced, the economy impact has been significant. Wages have gone up. Clients have not necessarily made it. But overall, as a business, we've done really well. Like, we've kind of navigated that, carefully and made some smart choices, and are really happy about where we are today, which is in front of where we were at the start of the pandemic. So from 2019 till now, when I was last at ACES in Kansas City, I'd actually say we're, in front.
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's great to hear. Yeah. Well, since we're talking ACES right off the top here, I know we have at least 2 out of the 4 of us going to ACES this year. I'm regretfully probably going to miss it. As I mentioned to Justin on the show, it's happens to be my 10-year wedding anniversary right around during ACES week there. So it's a little tough to make the trek, even though it's a little bit closer for me than it is for you, Michael. So you're making the real big investment of flying overseas, flying over at least 1 sea, if not 2. I know Sam's flying across the country.
I actually go to Salt Lake City every time I go to the US because I have family friends living there, it's a beautiful place. If you haven't been, it's a very interesting place from my perspective, obviously, with the heritage of the area. It was very strange the first time I went into a state-run liquor store, for example, and to see how that's all operating. But at the same time, just beautiful country, and everybody is so pleasant. And as part of, I've covered a lot of America for an outsider, and it just feels very wholesome. And, there's a bit of a social angle, which doesn't exist necessarily everywhere else that I've been. So, I'm looking forward to that. And I think that there's some side chats about things that might be going on. So, not too sure. Up for most things.
Awesome.
Yeah. There's a little bit, I think some people are coming in early. I am. Some people are staying later. And there's just so much to do in that part of the country in terms of hiking and sightseeing and everything like that. So I think a lot of people have some thoughts about what they might do when they get out there. So it's a great destination, and I'm looking forward to just hanging out with people again.
Michael, you had mentioned to us pre-show that you had a couple of things on the drawing board for you to do outside of the conference. You want to share that with our listeners?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, look, I actually spent some time in Montana for a year back in 2003 and met with some, really interesting outdoors types people. And so I'm actually going down to the Grand Staircase and volunteering to build some fences with a backcountry anglers group. And so they do sort of restorative work and, protect areas. So I'm kind of doing some giving back a little bit and just having a real local experience, I suppose, rather than just, your Vegas lights and a bit of skiing.
Wow,
very
that's
nice.
Really cool. I wish I had the time to stay afterwards, because that sounds really interesting to do. I mean, what brought that about? I mean, because you've been to Salt Lake City, so you kind of know the area, and you just reached out to some people.
Yeah. So Josh, who I stay with a lot, known him for over 20 years now, I think, and he just is right into the backcountry. He bow hunts. He processes anything he shoots. It's really outdoors country, and that whole the the whole mountains all the way through is just spectacular scenery. And like I can, it's a big contrast to what we do on our day to day to really disconnect. But I actually really enjoy building fences. And I know this sounds a strange thing to actually have a thing for, but something so satisfying about building a straight fence. There's a lot of geometry that goes into it, a lot of thinking. But when you like see it and it's there, it's permanent and it's done.
That's awesome.
It doesn't get a virus. It doesn't get malware. It's just a fence.
but you know, you're right though. Like you're talking about a straight fence, which just sounds like straight, but like the ground is not. So all of this, and you have to account for that when you're building. Because I had to repair my back fence, and it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Because then, you know, at one part the ground comes up, so I had to cut out the bottoms to make sure that it like leveled out. At the time, I wish I knew you did this. I would have invited you over.
Once you've done the 3 sides of your own yard, you're actually really good at it, and you've got no more fencing to do. So it's one of those strange. It's like migrating mail from an obscure place once, and you get, hey, I'll know this next time, and I don't ever need this again.
Exactly.
Right. That's really funny. I was mending a fence just this past weekend. We have the fence in the backyard. This little place we're renting that's falling apart, and the landlord keeps telling us they're going to be like replacing the fence, and it's wait for that. It'll be replaced soon. Meanwhile, like one board at a time just kind of like falls down. And so we went out there, just like me and a couple housemates, just fixing the fence. It was super fun. And I joke sometimes I go to Burning Man. I think a lot of people here know that by now. Part of what we do there is we build infrastructure in the desert, including pumping water from a 1,500-gallon tank to the kitchen and the bar and like different places where we use it, which means running hoses in the ground, and so like you're digging up basically the desert playa ground there and laying hoses and things, and digging ditches is super fun when all you do all day long is type on a little keyboard. Digging ditches is fantastic. So I joke I wouldn't mind if that were my job. I mean, be careful what you wish for, but it's definitely good for a break. Absolutely, I can relate to that.
We really can keep going on this because Australia has like a rabbit-proof fence. I think that your former president built a big kind of concrete fence.
I was waiting for it to happen in the conversation.
I mean, he talks about building
last time we spoke was 2017, and Trump was still president. So, we are in the future now, and don't let yourselves go back to the past, if I can be a little bit political.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, good fences make good neighbors, as the saying goes. So, there's something to be said for that. But besides fence building and some upcoming travel, Michael, what can you say about just like plans for this year? How would you distinguish this year compared to last year? Any themes on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the themes that's really stuck with me at the end of last year, I was really quite burnt out. I think, there are probably business owners understand this, particularly if they've got responsibilities for their staff who, obviously have mortgage pressure and things like that. And what I kind of sat down and realized over our Christmas break, was that I'd probably been just holding a little bit too tight to the things that had happened through COVID. And that was, let's just take it back. And I can still remember talking, with all those Zoom calls that got opened up with our colleagues that, from all over the world. Some people were stuck in places in the first few weeks and they couldn't get home, and we were supporting them. But then it became, well, how do we help our clients through? And I think what was interesting is that a little bit of my desire to make sure everyone got through was that I started to do things which didn't really make sense and took a lot of emotional toll. And so after a period of time, I think that we're not just holding our own businesses together. We're, obviously a very important piece of our clients' businesses. And I realized that our overreach in terms of care was just, was there. And so we established a bit of a saying around the office, which is like COVID ended at the end of 2023. And what that kind of is just it's a good test to just say, look, we're not in COVID anymore. And how did we do things before? And what can we learn from the period of time that we actually did through COVID? But we're going to correct all the crimes that we kind of committed. And they are things like writing contracts that don't make sense. That is supporting clients that have, scaled down to the point where they don't actually make, they're not actually easy to work with, and they're not enjoyable to work with because they just don't suit the business model that we want to carry forward. We have to pay our people, so we've had to increase our rates. And I think this is exactly what we were talking about in 2017 when we referred back to the GFC, where, I started a business, costs were going up and you kind of had to hustle. But I realize now that, some people are actually in a really good financial position. And so if they align with what we do, and we need to make sure that we have a fair and honest conversation about compensation for our time. And that means we can pay our people properly. And, our team has had to grow. Things don't get any easier, and we have to specialize now with people in different verticals in the business, from like security to device management to customer support and account management. So our costs aren't going down. So one of the things is that we're just auditing our client base, making sure that people are aligned with our, philosophy of what we're trying to do, coming onto the primary tool set that we need them to be on, not exclusively, but certainly it makes sense where possible to have everybody running the same equipment and tooling. So that's kind of been the angle. And I've been very strict on recontracting clients that have been out of contract now for, signed contracts in 2019, 2020, and like they need to have an updated contract.
Mm-hmm. In that scenario, with the strictness of re-signing people, were you giving them leeway just because of COVID, or was it because the relationship wasn't going in the direction it should have been?
100% of it is just having the hard chat. And I was probably not in the right spot to invest in team to give me the space to see what actually the things were that we needed to do. So it's 100% on me avoiding that. And there was some nervousness about approaching it. And I got to a point where it was like, I'd rather see what happens and have the cards fall how they fall rather than not know and just be holding on tight, hoping that nothing changes. I think that this is a really important point in business. There are no finite things that happen to us in business. It is 100% out of our control what happens to our clients' businesses generally when it comes from a financial position, whether, someone sells up or they have new team members that just don't work and align with us, or they want to grow and they have to employ people to do our jobs. So what I'm trying to do is not necessarily hijack our clients and say, look, you've been on a good rate for 3 years and we're going to increase that. What we're saying is we just need to make sure that the document that's in front of you, even if it stays the same in terms of price, is up to date.
Yeah.
On the back end of that, it's giving me a little bit more certainty around the value of the business. Because if we can book the 12-month contract, and I'll admit our contracts are a 12-month contract, we don't roll any longer than that generally, and everyone has a 60-day termination clause. So we're not ever in cahoots to say, look, you're on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But what it does do is it shows book value of the business. And so we can say, well, now we know we've got this kind of revenue. Now we can make these decisions for the business on leases, on cars, on computers, on staff. And I can also make sure that I know where I'm going personally, because one thing I've learned after so many years running a business is that it's not just taking a wage. It's you're trying to actually build something as financial value. So to answer the question, the reason why it hasn't happened has generally been on me. And there's not been a lot of resistance, to be honest, about re-signing, and also having hard chats about increasing prices to market rate, because everybody else has had to do it.
Yeah.
And I think when inflation is present, you have to capitalize on that. And I know that sounds really opportunistic, but it's easier to talk about, cybersecurity when there's been a massive breach. It's easier to talk about prices going up when the media is talking about prices going up. So don't cloak and dagger, but certainly, get behind the media and use their narrative to help you get what you're looking for, if that's something that you're trying to achieve in your business.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, no one's going to give you credit, 2 years from now when you say, well, I wish I had raised my rates. Now I really need to raise my rates. And, guess what? I didn't raise my rates back then. So aren't you guys all happy that I didn't do it then and I'm doing it now? I mean, it's going to be a much harder conversation. I totally agree with you. I try to resist that urge to just jump on the bandwagon with stuff like this, because I don't want to look like, again, it's opportunistic and clients sort of see through that. Besides, on the macro level, that's what kind of creates more inflation, is if everyone just, jumps on board and continues to raise the prices, then my raising my prices could instigate someone else to raise their prices. And it just kind of like continues to cycle in that way. But you know what? I'm not responsible for the macro stuff. I need to just make sure my business is profitable. And so I mean, it's great advice to say, look, now's the time to do this, especially if it's already overdue. It's, if anything, it is a good opportunity to do it because people understand this is the way things go. Our tools have gone up in price, cost of labor, all of the things. So it has to get done at some point. It's a good opportunity to do it. And I think most people can understand that. Does that also act as a filter for you, Michael? If people just really are not on board with that, is it time for them to kind of, fade away?
I think what we've managed to do is create a situation that it highlights to the client what we're about and where their business has ended up. And we contrast where we were when we started and what we said were objectives and what they said were their objectives. And we just highlight that where they are now isn't that. And I think it's a little bit like any relationship, I suppose, a personal relationship. It's all well and good to be, young and have goals and life dreams and, be, at college, for example. But when you end up in a situation where you're, in your 30s, like people change and things don't necessarily go forever. And so we're just providing like an elegant way to start that conversation, I suppose. And what has happened for us since the beginning of the year is we've actually had, for the first time, someone who looks after our clients as an account manager. And he doesn't come from a traditional account management background. And so Tim's been really valuable to me because I have had to go through a lot of self-reflection about what we offer because I have to explain to him the deal that we did. And his first conversation with me is like, how did you get into this? This doesn't make any sense to me. How do we get out of it? And we've actually got massive arcs where we're going to be talking to clients for at least 6 to 9 months before we actually push the point on the contract because we actually haven't delivered some of the things we needed to do. We've actually probably overcharged them in some areas because, they've signed, we've not reviewed, it's not been in their favor. So we're doing a lot of self-reflection, a lot of back-end cleaning up and calling, us into account, I suppose, before we then put the spotlight on the situation, which ultimately is we don't want to work with the client. But the last thing I want to do is go, well, you don't want to work with this and we want to leave you. And this is an absolute disaster. Sorry, my fruity language probably won't fly. So I'll just, I'll keep it to that.
Oh, it'll fly. With this crew, it'll fly. But I think, I think you bring about some interesting points, something that affected me as well. I actually talked about it a few weeks ago, which is the part of exactly what you said. When I just decided to raise some rates, I realized I had not been in contact with some of my customers, and we were really lagging on our part. Like we had in our contract biannual meetings or quarterly meetings, and we weren't holding our end of the bargain there. Not that they were asking for it. We both just kind of let it lapse. And I realized I can't just come out of the blue and be like, hey, here are our new rates. I have to reestablish communication with that client. So that was a really big point as well.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm going to keep going on this, but there's a lot of places in life where there isn't levels of accountability that you find like a contract. And so it's very foreign for us to be under an arrangement like that. And I think a lot of people are aware. I had a divorce and I've got 3 sons from a former marriage. And what's really interesting is when you have a family court order about when you get to spend time with your children and when you don't, is that the time that you don't have your children is equally as protected as the time that you do. So you can actually plan your life and get on with things. And so I've lived under this kind of regime for a number of years now. But what it did highlight to me is if it's yours and it's owed to you, it's equally as much as if it's theirs and it's owed to them. So you can ask more of your client, but you also have to always be asking yourself. And we don't have a lot of accountability. When you run a business and you're the top dog, there isn't someone apart from the boogeyman who's behind you, who, a bit like the Grim Reaper, actually who is keeping you on your toes. So if you have those contracts, it's almost like you need to get somebody external to be an accountability person for that. And it's just like, send me your dates for your meetings and I'll kick you if you don't do it. Have you booked it? Yes, no. Like even arranging this call, like it was something where, I was making sure that I was checking in because like we have time zone changes and things like that. I don't want to be late. And that's because I'm going to let down 3 other people who've got important things to do if I didn't. So yeah, I think that's a really, I know it's a very sort of somber kind of piece of information to share, but it does highlight how important that is, that cadence and that accountability.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. I wasn't aware of that. And interesting insight you're drawing from the idea of a contract, a social contract in a way, and the idea of accountability, holding ourselves accountable, and then feeling like we're therefore able to expect more from the other side of that contract, as it were, or whatever the case may be. I feel like all four of us hold ourselves to very high standards in terms of like how we engage with clients, what we offer. We try to follow through with our word and provide the thing that we're promising to provide to clients, whether it's peace of mind about their technology and, the things you actually spell out in your contract. And the idea of care, you brought up, caring and we care about our clients. We want them to have a good experience, whether that means, again, following through on a certain contract or just, the feeling of they're being cared for. We want them to have that feeling as part of it. And sometimes that kind of becomes like a toxic level of care or something, like to ourselves, where we care too much for our clients, and maybe we need to reassess how we render our services, whether we need to offer these services to all clients. I'm curious if you could say more about the kind of idea of filtering through your client base, like reevaluating those relationships with your clients, and where care enters into it, where emotions enter into things, and then where you want to kind of rein that part in and say, this is business.
Yeah. Okay. That's a lot to unpack. I'll say that when you start out in business and you may have worked for somebody else and you've seen how they do things, it doesn't matter what the industry might be. I think everyone sort of who has an entrepreneurial bent thinks that they could improve the situation that they're in, or certainly has the ability to criticize, right? So that's the start point where you go, okay, well, I see a problem or an opportunity to solve, so I'm going to go out and do that. Now, I when I started my own business, I had a million ideas, and I executed them all in the first 18 months. And I was so excited about that. And I was delivering like a high quality of service. And the people were like, wow, this is spectacularly different to what everybody else is doing. And then I realized you can't sustain it. And that's why a lot of other businesses that I work for, which have got 10 years of experience and tenure, they just don't have the energy to continue to work. And I'm sure they started with the same objectives. Mm-hmm. So you give a lot, right? So I think that's really the thing. And then as you're starting out, every dollar counts. And I think the shows that you probably did back in 2015 and you talk to people who are sole contractors, I'll make a poor choice and I'll take the money because I need the money to feed my family. Over time, the business grows and things become more complex, or your skills increase and the people that you're supporting don't necessarily change. And I think that is the arc between taking on home support, small business support, enterprise support, and education support, right? So when you start to specialize, then you can start to go, okay, well, now I can push back against, these sort of things that I'm looking to achieve for myself, to challenge myself, what I want to do with my time, where I want to spend it, who I want to talk to. And it's very easy you can see, even through this kind of example, that you get to a certain point where after 5 years, you've got a really complicated client base, you've got a really complicated skill set, and the people that are around you that are going to be the best read on whether it's going well or not are going to be, your partner, your kids, your people that you sit at the bar and moan to, or your colleagues, right? So I think that's the first canary in the coal mine, which is how much do you complain about things?
I complain a ton.
You made a career out of it, guys. Yeah. You get a weekly show on, they're like, I've got this problem. I don't like this client. But I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what you've actually done, effectively created this space that's safe for you to do exactly that, which is to test A/B what's going on. So getting down to it, because we have a team, there's a few things that we have to look at. One is we have to look at the financial side of it, of course, but then we just sit down, and it hasn't happened for a little while, I admit, because we had a bit of change in our staff. We just sit down and we just list all the clients, and I just say, okay, so who calls in from this client the most, and do you enjoy seeing that number come up? And the first answer is no.
Great question.
We're going to discuss that.
Yeah, that's solid.
Then we go, okay, well, why? is it the person who's the wrong point of contact? Are you the wrong person to receive the call? Is the question the wrong type of question? And I am not a huge fan of kind of giving personal examples in public, but at the same time, we have a client who, was one of those clients that was not particularly aligned with our pricing model for a long time and reluctantly joined onto it. Leadership has changed a little bit in terms of how much engagement they have. And now we have a person who, like, for a better word, is an EA, sort of implementing a lot of these things. And what I've found is that every time the team interact with this person, they feel like they're the janitor. They feel like they're not given the kind of respect and buy-in by an EA. And so we have a huge problem here. And I'll say it, like, we unfortunately have a team that is, we actually do have a female employee. We have a majority of our team are male. And I stop and I go, okay, is this a gender issue? Is this like a problem with communication, or is this an attitudinal thing? And then, no, it's not that. Like, it's in writing, it's to me, it's to, our female staff as well. And so, okay, it's not that. And what it really came down to is this: it's just the way that this person communicates is condescending. Yeah. And it's learned behavior. I believe it's 100% because the boss who she works for speaks like this, and she thinks that that's how you do it. So we've had to thrash that out and circle around that issue and go, is the contract worth it to deal with this person? And ultimately, we went back to the business and said, we have to charge you more money, and we just don't want to deal with this person anymore. Right.
Wow.
So
good for you. That's fantastic. What a great, it's just routing around the issue, like it, in both ways.
It's not working for us, right? It's not going to. Right. And then they're like, well, where do we go? Where do we get help? I'm like, well, like, I can give you a list of people to call.
Right.
But I just, it's easier for them to just say, well, we just want to have this person deal with you, and we can just get on with working with you. So, look, that's one way. I think everybody, if you have any kind of client base, you should be very clued into how much they're bringing you in terms of revenue. Yeah. And then this is really hard to do because you're kind of just churning away doing everything. You've got to work out your profitability. And then if you can, try and work out your profitability per client. A number of years ago, I was speaking to someone in Kansas at ACES, because that's where I talk to people about this stuff, about time recording. Now, that sole contractor didn't have any team, didn't record time. And I'm like, how can you record no time and still bill? And so that, conversation started this journey of recording all your time and where you're spending it. Because ultimately, people who think they have the flexibility of working for themselves are actually doing two jobs and work more than a full-time hours. So when you can see where that time is spent and where it's encroached upon, you can say, well, if I'm working 60 hours a week, I need a person to come in and do 20 of those hours, but I'm not making any more than a full-time wage working for somebody else. What am I doing? So those are the kinds of areas that you, as an individual, like, obviously everyone has their own needs. It could be you're just a boutique person who's just doing it just to supplement your income. You might be two people where there's a dependency on both people to operate in sort of some kind of arrangement. But then when you've got a wider team, and you've got payroll taxes, and you've got healthcare benefits, and you've got all these other things that you have to kind of add on, profitability is key.
So to unpack that a little bit on profitability, one question I have is, like, how do you analyze that on a per client basis? Another topic that comes to mind is the client you mentioned earlier. When you find yourself talking about the client and kind of dealing with the client and debriefing about the issues you have with this client, I found in the past, it's really important to factor that time into the equation to say, okay, so this is the contract, this is the amount we're charging the client, same as everyone else, right? And then we have these clients who are just a joy to work with. They add to my quality of life. They're easy to deal with. There isn't a lot of overhead. Now we have this client, and it seems like on a weekly basis, the three of us on my team are talking about this client for an hour or two. I mean, sometimes it's like really bad. Other times it's quick, but it seems to always be there in the background. So if you factor in that time, suddenly the loss of that client is not as big of a deal, because you can end up offsetting that with taking on one new client that is just easy to deal with, problem solved, or, two clients because you've got a little bit of extra space now that you're not dealing with this one client's issues all the time. So a couple things, analyzing the profitability on a per client basis. How do you factor in those kind of nebulous aspects of it, just the quality of life impact or the just struggle that you have with that client? And then also the time tracking aspect. One of the advantages that I saw early on, I thought I saw with managed services in general, but certainly with unlimited support models where you just have like flat rate per person or per computer. The idea of not charging for every minute or not tracking every minute seemed beneficial. And yet, of course, I want to know how much time am I actually spending? Am I profiting in this model with this client? So it still seems necessary to track that time. How do you track that time? And is it the kind of situation where it's garbage in, garbage out? Do you use tools for this? How do you figure that one out?
Yeah, so tracking time is a really difficult one to do, particularly when you've got to get a bunch of people on board. I think the hardest part with managed services is that you do have ticketing systems, you do have a professional service automation tool potentially to run that side of the business. And because the model is it's all included, the question is, well, why do I need to track my time from the team? And I think the answer is, well, my business model doesn't make any difference to how you're told to do your job. And that's
Great
like
point.
a really polite way of saying it.
Yeah.
And the way I've always kind of approached our business is that you're just answering the phone or answering the ticket. It doesn't matter who calls or where they're from or whatever else. If they call, you help. And sometimes that's taken too literally and people who we actually don't support get help, and that's fine, but that's just a mistake. But overall, the last thing we want to do is have the mid-level person at a company who's got a problem they need to solve, who's supported by us, get a question saying, well, actually, you have no credit left. And that's not the support team person to have a conversation about that. Right. So firstly is you have to abstract away what the problem is that you're solving for the person and what the problem is you're solving by having a business. Mm-hmm. And so the time recording piece it's just an accountability to, okay, I did a thing, I recorded it, and away we go. And we don't expect people to have 100% utilization. That's impossible to get. I would like to see 50% of their time at least attributed to something, and even if that's an internal task. And so we run client projects are very basic in terms of, effectively what is called a managed service contract, right? So we don't, I can talk about business model another time, but what we're sort of getting at here is when the time goes in, I have the ability to see what was done, and it's just simply remote support, on-site support. They're the two categories we have. Mm-hmm. Then we have an account management function in that same project. And outside of that, we have a non-billable, and that's it. So it's very easy for staff to record time against the thing because mostly it's just remote support. So they don't have to recategorize it down to, was it email support? Was it, and so reducing that barrier really encourages people to do those things. Integration with your calendar, you can go through later and review. So I had 4 meetings and I had no time. So I'll just add the meetings into my calendar and away we go. Right. They could be actually internal meetings. Mm-hmm. Right. So if I call a meeting, it's like an hour, then put your hour in against the business. Right. Then we know that we're talking in circles about clients, reviewing them for we've already burnt through two hours of effective time, the 4 of us here discussing this. Right. So time doesn't stop, and time is linked to money in the capitalist method. So you can see that the correlation for me is very much about that. So, look, I don't want to give away all of the things that we do and how we do it, but at the same time, that's a big part of it, which is the accountability. And if it comes to the fact that you've got a review cycle with your team, then you can talk about this regularly.
I've had conversations with my guys a couple of times about, we know that they talked with a particular customer on a particular day, and then we see that there was no time cataloged at the end of the week. And we're like, what happened? Oh, it was just like 10 minutes here. It wasn't a big deal. I'm like, no. Like that, even if we're not like, I don't care if it's an MSP customer and we're not billing by the minute or by 15-minute increments. It also helps us when we look at our reports at the end of the year or the end of the quarter, how much time was spent on this customer. And did we bill the appropriate amount of that magic number or whatever it is? And sometimes the employee doesn't necessarily get that because it's not their job to get that, but it is their job to put in the time. And we keep having to drill it in. It's a tough one.
I've seen some businesses do some interesting things on that. I think that this is the carrot and the stick method. So, at the end of the day, if that's part of their job, you just have to set a KPI. Now, you don't want them to create junk because it's just to meet a KPI, and then you'll be like wading through all this, data that's not actually accurate just because you've demanded that they have a 50% utilization inside the time recording tool.
Right.
But I can 100% tell you that if I spend more time running client meetings than a support person on the desk does doing tickets over the course of a week, either I don't need that person, right? Because you're not doing anything, right? Or I'm spending way too much time talking to people in meetings. So it's, it's very much about trying to keep it public as well. We don't want to create bad habits. We hate ticket metrics. Ticket metrics, I think, are going to sink your business if you focus on that as a key performance indicator to your clients, but also internally. Some tickets just take forever. Like I'm the one in the business has a ticket that is open for 3 months.
Yeah, 3 months. That's pretty quick by my standards. I mean, I've got tickets I'm closing from 2 years ago at this point, but you're right. Usually it's something I'm owning where I'm like, I'm not letting this person not take this recommendation. I don't care if it takes me 2 years. Like they will eventually migrate this email server and, they finally do. But if I'm measuring that in terms of like ticket open to ticket closed, I mean, forget it. That's just going to blow the metric. So yeah, that's a great point that,
But the mental overhead of having that there is also not to be dismissed. So, but look, I hope that kind of, I don't want to, we can talk about this again later, but it's just, it's really about that. And then in terms of profitability, if you're making a commitment and you're saying that you get 10 hours and it's all you can eat, and that's part of, actually what I'll say is this, you have to define clearly what you're giving and what you're not giving. And even on an all you can eat basis, there is a limit, right? So when you say it's all you can eat, it means we're not going to invoice you for every 15 minutes. It doesn't mean you're going to get unlimited support. Mm-hmm. So even if you have a contract and it's got a 10-hour limit, you need to know when you get to 10 hours. So when you do an annual review, you can see that you're going over. And so how can you ask for more money if you've got no empirical data to work against?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a great point. Yeah,
I mean, it's always the struggle finding out what you're billing versus what you're working against. We joke about it plenty of times in this show, but that's why I've changed my plans over the years and a multitude of times, and I probably will after talking to you today. But when we get to that, it's figuring out how those numbers work, and if it is a magic number, so to speak, you have to have something to calculate it against, or else you're just blowing in the wind. And it's impossible to understand if you're profitable if you don't have some kind of metrics to. I'm not talking about ticket metrics. I agree with you, by the way, that's kind of not something I would go by. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I need to know that my people are putting in time. I can calculate it. At least I can look at it once a quarter or what have you and figure that out, or else I'm dead in the water. I don't know what I'm billing versus what I'm working.
Yeah, and particularly when they're new clients, right? Working out the price for the first year is really, really hard. I think that we went through recently and did an annual review for a client, and I think that let me just get the numbers right. I think it was like 150 hours for the year was our estimate, was what we said that it would cost. We came in within 10% of that.
Wow.
And our team, when we talk about it, that client is probably the client that operates the best. And the reason why is from an account management perspective, they think they're getting the right amount of value. From a business, we think we're delivering the value that we said that we would. And because those two things at a leadership level fit right, the downstream thing is that no one in the business thinks that we're expensive, not assisting vendor. And so the team get treated with a little bit more value, that when they're helping people, they think that that's really, a important, well-judged value addition to their day. So it's equally when you're getting paid too much and you're not delivering, that. And your internal voice is going, oh shit, like they're gonna know, or something's going to go wrong, and then they're going to analyze and ask for reports, and you'll be like, well, we didn't spend the right amount of time. And Yeah, so I think that it's all about just the happy middle, but you have to define what it is.
Yeah. It's really insightful stuff. The idea of just tracking the time, this came up today in a meeting I had, and maybe I was overcomplicating it, because it seems like it would be pretty simple to just look at someone's calendar and expect that the time is accounted for. I think where things get a little bit challenging is like where you have a consultation with a client where the technician or consultant is working on something that has a lot of like stops and starts, a lot of progress bars. There's like a waiting thing. Maybe the person has to leave for a coffee break and come back, and then you're waiting for them. So you can fill that like nebulous time with other things, admin work and other internal company processes and things like that. But I think that's where, to me, it gets a little bit harder to analyze, because something that might result in what is worth say 15 minutes or 30 minutes of billable can be comprised of 10 5-minute, or whatever it would be. Let's say 5-minute, sessions spread out over the course of an hour or two. So it's tricky in terms of like how you account for the time spent on something from start to finish versus like the billable time for that versus did you do anything else, or were you just looking at a progress bar, So that's I think where I haven't quite had a breakthrough on like how to deal with that. But I think building the mindset is the main thing. Like just making sure that your team is aware of the concept of I need to be diligently working on something throughout the workday. I can't just hide in the background and wait for 5 p.m. or whatever time it is. So, I mean, is that kind of what you've been achieving with your team, is to build this mindset where you expect them to use this software to track the time that they're spending, 50% of the time, let's say, is your goal. And does that result in them just, doing a better job of trying to be productive? I mean, that's ultimately what the goal is, right?
I don't know. I can't question the productivity of the team, right? That's not something that we're driving this for. I know that the team work because I can, and then this is the thing, like I can see the tickets getting closed. I can see the work being done, but the difference is that the person who sits in front of the leadership at the client is not the person touching the tickets. So you can't say I did these many like resets and that many new builds because that data doesn't exist. So I'm not going to wade through tickets and get analysis there. What I'm saying is I just need the time. For example, if it's a new machine spin up, like it's going to take an hour. Let's just call it for what it is. Like just put an hour in.
Okay.
And when the ticket closes, like you've done an hour, like it might take you 2 days to do it. I'm not too fussed which day it goes into. Right. Advanced ticketing systems, minimum ticket touch time, 15-minute increments. Like I have literally seen new staff come on board and, it's 8 hours in the system to do a build because they don't realize that each time they put in 1 minute, that 1 minute means 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, it's out of this like world, how long they've spent, but it's not real. So yeah, look, if you're on your numbers, if you're looking at it regularly, you can see this stuff very, very easily. And I kind of miss going and being myself as a sole trader because you kind of, that level of accountability was just really there. I mean, Jerry knows 100%, like 100% what he bills for, 100% of how much time he's given away for free. You've got to have a billable rate that is double the amount that you want to earn because you're only going to work 50% of the time because it's effectively impossible to work more than 50% of billable time when you're running your own business and moving from here to there. So look, I think there's a lot to it. It's an art as much as a science, and you've got to just work with what works for you. And that's one thing I would just say. Everyone has to find the thing that works. But if you don't know where to start, just know that you have to do it. And then it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something, but it has to be something that has no friction. And so, there are really basic tools out there for graphic designers that do time tracking for jobs. Just pick a really basic tool that's like a stop-start timer that allows you to categorize it into little lists or a Kanban board or however it does it. It doesn't need to be spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a great insight too about just tracking it per client. It's like you want to know the time that was spent for the client. You don't necessarily need to audit your team and say, like you should have been doing more email responses rather than getting that coffee break or whatever. It's not about micromanaging the employees. It's more about just making sure that you have the accounting for that purpose of reviewing it with your clients to make sure everything is working well. But yeah, I mean, so a couple of things I want to call attention to. Jason Harrison, previous guest on the show, says track the time, sell the value. I think it's a great encapsulation. You've got to track the time. You've got to know how you're spending your time and how much time you're spending, but you're not selling the time to the client anymore in this kind of mindset. You're selling the value of your services. For me, I'm still tracking time. I'm still selling time, but I'm selling time based on value in some cases because of the fact that things sometimes do take longer, even though, I'm waiting for something and I could track every minute, or I could just bring it down to what the value of that job is. And so I kind of find some happy medium there. But I think you made a good point too, Michael, about, it's much easier as a sole proprietor. I'm curious to hear from Jerry if Jerry has any, thoughts about, man, I'm so glad with my life choices to be a one person operation.
They're laughing at us.
all this overhead that's needed for you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've been so silent during this conversation, is because it's different for me in the way that Michael outlined. But not only that, a lot of the clients that I take on, I just have a flat rate to manage in the machine, and it's still time and materials beyond that. So because I'm a sole entrepreneur, and I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but I'm not walking into those opportunities of a 15, 25 person operation that I'm pitching my services to. So my skew or my profile of people that I work with is 3 to 5 people in an office under most cases, or an individual, or an army of 2. So the dynamics are completely different. And just being yourself, whether you're getting value from the services you're selling, or this client is just draining too much time from you, and whether it's a good match. So you always have your hand on the pulse. When in hearing Michael talk about things about doing quarterly reviews, although you didn't really touch on it very briefly, when listening to this conversation, I may not be servicing my clients as well as I could be, because I feel like, I don't know, I've got to go to that other job, or I've got to look for the next sale down the road, always trying to keep the income flowing. So I feel like I don't have a lot of myself to spread around, and a lot of those reviews that we may have agreed to get missed. But as Sam said, the clients aren't looking for them, and I don't have that many of them in my portfolio. So it's a very different dynamic that you all 3 are working with than I do as a solo entrepreneur.
To your point, Jerry, too, it's when the clients aren't looking for them, it's not a big deal normally throughout the course of a year. It's okay, they're not looking for my meetings. They really don't care. Things are humming along. It's only when something has to happen. And usually that something is a financial burden on the customer. At that point, then they're going to be like, hey, weren't we supposed to meet this year? What's going on? And all of a sudden they'll question everything that you do because there's been no communication there. And I literally found that out the hard way. I'm not like preaching. I'm just like, it's happened to me, and I realized my mistakes is just, I got it. And what you were saying is true, though, because you're focusing on, well, I got a project to get done, or I got a sale I could possibly make. I don't have time to just, hey, Mr. Customer, how's it going this week? Kind of a conversation. And it's tough to make those times because it feels like it's not a revenue stream, but I think it's placing the seeds for the change in your revenue stream in the future.
And hearing your personal story that you shared on Patreon, Sam, I listen to that and I think, well, be careful what you wish for. You don't want to be in those positions where you have a very difficult liaison that you have to deal with. Very, very similar to the story, Michael, that you were outlining. Sam has something that's current. Yeah.
I just want to say that it's all the same. The scale of these these consulting businesses, which is what we run, effectively employ people who are able to be consultants that just don't have the skills to do it for themselves, right? So you're trusting people who are really good at problem solving, who are really perceptive. But even when you're a sole operator, I think that the reactionary part of doing business costs a lot. And inside our organization, we don't find a problem and just drop everything and talk about it with the client. What we try and do, if it's not a fire, we put it onto an issues list. We talk about the issue calmly with our internal team and then reallocate it to where it needs to go. But if you're a sole operator and you've got issues that come up, don't just email your client when there's an issue. Just put that issue onto your meeting list, and then you've got an agenda already. So I think that you can construct a methodology even as a small business, and it can be as simple as, here's the email reminder to email them on that day. And you just go, well, here are the things that I was thinking about. And to Sam's point, you don't have to change your rates every time you have a conversation with someone. So what you can do is you can go, I need to talk about rates, but I'm not going to talk about it this week, because the other trap you fall into is you all of a sudden email all your clients at once about something, and then they all say yes.
Yeah.
And then you haven't got the capability to deliver. And so the goal is to kind of keep it just, you've got three layers in your business. You've got your meat and potatoes, it just goes. It's there, you know about it. Your machine rate, whatever. Then you need to find your recurring, even if it's not recurring billing, but you need to recurring like labor tier. And then you've got to find the projects, but you're dictating when the projects get done, not the client. So if you can say, well, I know, for example, I need all of my clients to do this thing and it's going to be important for their business. Let's talk about SPF, DMARC, DKIM, right? That can be anywhere from a 2-second implementation, because you've already put the person into a platform that allows you just to click the button and then you've got analytics turned on, or they are in like a world of hurt and GoDaddy somewhere, and you're going to take 10 hours to get them out of it, right?
Everywhere in GoDaddy's a world of hurt.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So from that perspective, right, the conversation is, I need to talk about this issue. It's a topical issue. It's in the media. Email deliverability is a hot point. Google have information on their website about it. All these businesses that offer DMARC and DKIM services are talking about it. Just put a little bit of a teaser in front of your clients and say, look, this is something, if you want email deliverability to be done, we need to reassess it. This is a change. This is different. This is not something we've missed. This is something that's different, and we need to get it right. We don't know how much it's going to cost, because yet we don't have full visibility over what's going on for you. If you do have full visibility, it should be just like turn it on, because you've got it's all there. So that client ends up with a 1-hour consult. But when we've done recording on these domains, we have, some domains have 35 different sending paths, and some of those are actually fraudulent. So that's the reason why we're making these changes, is to actually stop people using your domain as a relay and to spoof you. But you don't know how big the problem is until you look at the problem.
Right.
So, it's like getting your blood test and your x-ray done before they go and operate, rather than saying, well, we're just going to go into the theater and cut you open and just work until we're done.
Yeah.
See what's going on once we're inside.
Yeah, exactly. Exploratory surgery is what they call that, right? And
yeah, actually what they just did to my dog. They were like, we'll open his leg and we'll see what the problem is. I'm like, you'll find out after the fact? I'm like, okay.
Right. Yeah. Dive in head first, blade first. Yeah, no, that's a
Michael.
That's
I just have to ask, where did this business acumen come from? Because we all like to think, we're not the greatest business people, but we're pretty good. I mean, that's what you sort of think about yourself at the end of the day. But you obviously have some strategies, and it's clear that you've thought about this for years. And you have very clear, concise answers. Were you just born like this, or where did this come from? The information you're imparting to us today is so valuable, and it makes us feel like we really need to be more like Michael. I mean, I'm not blowing sunshine in your sky. I really feel that way strongly.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone really wants to be more like me. I'll say that. But I think having an astute observation skill of what people are doing, asking lots of questions and inquiring how things are done, looking at other people who are successful and going, well, how did they do it? And then, I'm effectively the laziest person. It's anyone who has known me for the longest time.
Not lazier than Sam, though.
Yeah, no one beats me, obviously.
Well, I suppose the rabbit hole is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, right? That's the actual diagnosis that you probably would get to, where I don't have the focus to do deep work until there's something that it has to be solved as a crisis, and then I'll act. And this is where a lot of people out there who are really fast decision makers are not fast decision makers. They have thought about this a lot, and then they just act in one impulse. And so for me, the laziness factor, and I don't want to say that that's a jokingly way, I will work to make something more efficient because I don't want to do it the harder way. Over the last 12 months, I've outsourced financial control to someone because I was scared of doing it before. COVID 2024 is COVID free, so I'm going to do things like I should have done them before. So I've outsourced it, and it's really interesting to watch how that has worked, because people do things differently to me, and that's great. And then all of a sudden I see a little bit of insight of how they do things, and I'm like, I'm going to explore that. And the warning I give anybody that does outsource work for me is, I'm going to automate you out of your job. You just open the door and you show me a little bit of how you do it, and I'm going to research it, and I'm going to find a way to do it automatically. And I'll even pay as much as the person to do it automatically, because they don't make mistakes. So what's really interesting with that is that it's just this constant reevaluation and optimization and improvement. And that's really all it comes down to. It's not a great place sometimes to sit in your head and have that happen, but at the same time, that's how you get to here. So it's just keep questioning everything and keep your North Star. So I've got teenage kids, right? One of them's last year of high school, a couple of others in high school. And I just say to my eldest, you're going to make mistakes, but every decision you get is a next decision after that, and make a better decision the next time. And if you can kind of have a North Star and you make a couple of poor choices and you kind of bring it back, that's great. But if you don't have a North Star, you're going to get off in the weeds really, really easily, because, imagine going down a golf course without a pin and a cup, you wouldn't know which way to hit the ball. And so if you keep chipping the ball towards the cup and the pin, you're going to get there. And I think that's an easy example for that. If you don't know which way you're firing the ball, you're not going to make it to the goal.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the answer or not. It's just
a great answer. Yeah. I mean, the idea of acting in, making a decision, and then from having made a decision, it might've been wrong, but now you have more information. Now, that was wrong. You've eliminated a choice. Also, you're now at a different place and you have a new perspective from being in that place. So that's helped me in the past, where I've been, paralyzed with decisions to make, like thinking I need to decide this and I need to make the best possible decision, and the stakes are high. So I don't want to act until I'm really sure. Sometimes it's way better just to say, let me try this and let me see what happens. And if it's the wrong decision, I'll say it was the wrong decision and I can try a different thing. So I like the idea of combining that with the idea of a North Star, or, or the flag at the hole, or whatever it is, and to say, okay, like I have somewhere I'm aiming for, and all I need to do is try and do something, and then I'll get a little bit closer each time. So it's great advice.
And the other one is just, I would rather be in control of a mistake than having someone deliver me a problem because I didn't act, and then I have to fix it. And I'm under duress then. So, you're better off putting yourself out there into more awkward situations more often, so you get familiar with that kind of space, rather than going, I'm afraid. Because if you're working from a point of fear, you're 100% going to get your worst nightmare if you sit there and you focus on it, because it'll just manifest. So, don't sit there fearing it. Just try and find what you're looking for and try and move towards it. And that can be simple. Like it could be a goal to, holiday or spend time with someone, and you're allowed to have totally self-indulgent goals. And I think that this is one thing I would say is, if you want to aim for a Ferrari, go for it. There is no reason why you can't buy a Ferrari, as long as you've got enough money in to have housing and food. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing shameful about wanting to be bigger, brighter, better. It's just a lot of social constructs that you have to break down to go, well, I was told to be modest by my family. I grew up in this religious construct, and so these things are okay or not okay. You're allowed to reevaluate all of those things, because the society that we live in today is not the society that I grew up in the 80s. Like it's totally different. Yeah. So just all I'm saying is really know yourself.
Love that.
Well, I think everything you shared with us is extremely thoughtful. I think you're extremely thoughtful, and I just feel fortunate today to be part of this conversation in a very small way, because I've learned a lot.
Me too.
I enjoy your time too, guys. It's just like nice to be able to kind of speak back rather than shake fists at the radio in the car.
I can't imagine you listening to the show just going, no.
Any particular gripes to bring to our attention now that you have the live fist shaking possibility here from a previous show, maybe?
Solve the problem properly or don't solve it at all. So I'll give you an example. I don't know. So Australia is this big island continent off the bottom of the world, and off the bottom of that continent is a place called Tasmania. It's an island. It's an entire state that's an island. And to get here from where we work, it's a 2.5 hour flight. There's probably 3-4 flights a day. But that distance forces us to do things in a very unique way, because the people we're supporting here still need the support. And they also still need to have the access to the tooling. So what we do here is we build really resilient and redundant systems that cost a little bit more, but overall, the downtime and the amount of work required to solve that problem on a day-to-day basis is really, really low. And so it's the same as planning to go for a remote hike in the wilderness. You prepare, you buy the right equipment. It's very different to going, well, I'm just going down to the park to have a picnic. I'll just pick up some stuff from the $2 shop on the way and sit down there and then throw it all in the garbage bin on the way out. So I think that what I'm sort of saying is that if you're going to go, and I think that this kind of is to the heart of, when you have to do rework with your clients, your labor is more expensive overall than the products that you're implementing. So you need to show that the slightly better widget that you put in, access point, switch, like email filtering, whatever, if you can show the value that the more expensive thing is going to give a better result because there's going to be less labor attached to it long term and less interference, that's key. And so that is what I would say when I hear a lot of the things that you're going through. If the client hasn't got the budget to buy the right thing, just don't do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to pick up the problem. You don't have to solve it for them. The car dealership that you go to, if they won't install an inferior part in your car, they'll want to use the genuine part because that's the right part for the job. So you have to take that on board, because sometimes if you're underselling what needs to be put in, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, because that will ultimately not work well. Your reputation may take damage from the individual basis, which is the one that you get all emotionally attached to. But beyond that, they then complain to their next door neighbor that their IT guy is rubbish. So again, there's no one has ever said that Apple is expensive and that's the problem with Apple. That's not the thing that people complain about.
Right.
If you can't afford it, that makes it, a different proposition. But no one ever, they talk about, the feature or the functionality is the thing that is really the grievance, because once they made the decision to buy the expensive thing, they expect it to work.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're describing that scenario of, putting in the more robust solution, it occurred to me the client has to be on board with that. I mean, that's the type of client I want to work with, is the client that has the budget to do the right thing and not, try to cut corners and, could you have a cheaper option, that kind of thing. So that should be a good filter for us as well when choosing the clients to work with it's a question of budget, and we charge a certain amount per hour or we charge a certain amount per month. We do the right thing, and then they don't have to worry about it on a regular basis. And I really like the idea of thinking about what would you do if you were like, again, to bring it back to Burning Man, this is what we do when we go to the middle of the desert for 10 or 12 days, is we have to front load all the decision making and think about all the things we need and make sure that we've got redundancy where we need it, because we're not just going to pop out and go grab something at the closest, Home Depot or whatever it is. There isn't one anywhere near there, and there's no leaving and coming back. So you have to make that decision. What if I were installing this part and configuring it once, with the idea being that, ideally it will never fail, or if it does fail, the failure mode is one that I can work with remotely, or that I can, swap in a replacement, or whatever the case may be. So thinking about our businesses that way is definitely a good mindset change. And also involving the client, where if they're not on board with that, then they really probably shouldn't be our client at that point. So I like that Jason saying, sell the value again.
Dealership, you're not the expert, right? And you just and you have very limited choice. What are you going to do? If it's on a tow truck and it's at the dealership, it's like pay to get it fixed and you can drive it home, or you can pay for another tow truck to tow it somewhere else. The client, I think you got to give your clients a little bit of, you're the authority, right? Yeah. And this is just how it's done. And if they don't want to do it that way, that's okay. Someone else will do it differently.
Someone else.
But you're not worried about, again, this is moving away from trying to be the person that's solving someone else's problem that you're implicating yourself in, and just delivering a service. If you deliver a service, you know what you're delivering, you know what it costs, you know how it works, and you know all the problems. That's all you need to know. Like the fact that the person is doing it at home or at work, or they're a designer or an artist or an accountant, who cares? Like every single business that we look after in the advertising industry, they are all the same from a back-end perspective. They don't have any technology uniqueness at all. But how they present on the front end is amazingly diverse.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Someone I worked with recently said it a while ago, just manage the client, don't let the client manage you. And it's just the whole aspect of, don't let them be who dictates what occurs and what software or hardware you should use. It's not a good way to operate. It's going to end up in failure at some point.
Yeah. These are great points. It occurs to me, because I want to second everything Jerry said about you, Michael. I mean, it's been a really interesting conversation, and you bring so much to the table, and you're so well-spoken. Jerry often says to us, do you want me to come over there and just run your computer for you? I feel like I want to invite you to come over here and run on my business for me, because I think you'd be doing such a better job, but I can benefit from your insight and guidance in the meantime. So I hope we can talk again and ask all the follow-up questions that are probably going to occur to us as soon as we hang up. But it's been a really interesting conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. And just keep on trucking at the end of the day. Like you get to a certain point and it's just, we've got a lot of years left in our careers, and you're going to have to reinvent
some of us.
Inflation. There'll be a few more years, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But thank you very much for the opportunity, and look, I hope I can connect with you again soon.
Right on. Well, as we wrap up, I got one more quick thing to share here, which is that we have some new merch just to share with the listeners out here. And thank you, patrons, for participating in the live chat as well. As promised, patrons, you will get free merch. So I'll give you the link in just a second. But here's some new stuff we came up with. We have some stickers. We have a mug. We have a new T-shirt.
Look at
and so I'm glad this little PDF worked. I hadn't tested this before, so StreamYard with the PDF.
Do it live.
So we have some holographic stickers, some regular stickers, and a new shirt and a mug so far, and a lot more to come. So thank you all for your participation, patrons for showing up, and thank you so much, Michael Thomsen from Origin84, reporting in live from Australia. And we really appreciate you sharing so much of a wealth of business knowledge with us and providing us some guidance that we clearly so woefully need, as evidenced by our weekly griping and therapy sessions. So thank you again, Michael. It's been awesome to talk to you.
At all. Have a good evening, everyone.
Cheers. Special thanks to the following community members whose strong monthly support has sustained us for all these years: Ryan Gowdy, CoreCompetent.com, Weldon Dodd, Kanji.io, Richard Wingfield, EnvisionDesign.net, Adam Rice, AskAdam.io, Mac Admins Podcast, podcast.macadmins.org, Tim Nyberg, TheMacGuys.com, Michael Thomsen, Origin84.com, Matthew Waples, Waples.net, Tom Puls, BoxIT.tech, Jerome Potters, PITPro.nl, Steve Sorbo, MacSOS.biz, Andy Espo, CallAndy.com, and Nate Sinall, WeAreAScout.com. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our patrons at every level of support. If you enjoy the show, we really would love your support. And if you already support us and can increase your monthly pledge, we really do find that encouraging. CommandControlPower.com and click support. Thanks very much for listening and for supporting the show.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of rap